welcoming a return guest to the program, Clifford May. He's president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, online at defenddemocracy.org. Good to have you with us tonight.
Well, it's good to be with you.
First of all, we have to, I think, take a look at this Associated Press story. They say they have seen a document in which Iran will be allowed to use its own inspectors to investigate a site where it's been accused of developing nuclear arms under a secret agreement with the United Nations. This just gets better and better and better.
Well, it should get more and more troubling, particularly to those members of the House and Senate who haven't made up their minds, and actually to some of those who have. The Iranians have said for some time that, look, you can have inspections of declared sites, the ones that we tell you can inspect, but not military sites and not undeclared sites, covert sites. Now they're saying, according to this agreement, it's a secret agreement, we should discuss that we'll actually inspect ourselves, and we'll find out if we're doing anything we shouldn't be doing. And if we're doing anything we shouldn't be doing, we'll let you know. Don't worry about it.
This reads like a Saturday Night Live skit, for God's sake. As I have said before, with only a touch of cynicism attached, why don't we just sell them the damn nukes, and at least we'll get the cash flow out of it? I mean, this is unbelievable.
Well, that makes more sense than than this deal does. You're absolutely right. Jim, if I want you to imagine my coming on your show in October of 2001, and you said, Cliff, give me a prediction. And I said, okay, within less than 15 years, here's what's going to happen. We'll have a president who will decide to give tens of billions of dollars and two pathways to nuclear weapons to the leading terrorist sponsor in the world on the basis that leading terrorist sponsor says, don't worry, we don't have nuclear weapons. We're not developing nuclear weapons. We've never developed nuclear weapons. And don't worry, if we decide to, our inspectors will reveal that fact to you. You'd say, Cliff, you're not coming on this show again because you're crazy, but I would have been proven correct because that's what's happening.
It is just remarkable. I cannot wait to hear the administration even try to explain this. First of all, what the hell is the United Nations International Agency for Atomic Energy doing getting involved in this in the first place? The United States brokered this deal with Iran, and the mere fact that they say that this will be allowed, we ought to tell the United Nations to stuff it.
Well, the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, they're supposed to provide the inspectors. Normally those inspectors can come from many countries. The Iranians had earlier said, understand there'll be no American inspectors. We won't have them. There'll be no Canadian inspectors. We won't have them. Now, it's also important that this is a secret deal that was only revealed because two members of Congress, Mike Pompeo, House member, Tom Cotton, a senator, they found out about it, and it was an inadvertent admission to them when they were over in Vienna. It wasn't ever revealed. One problem with that is that Congress had been promised by the administration that they would get to review all the agreements and documents related to this deal, this executive agreement. It's not being called a treaty. We might want to discuss why.
We certainly do. But go ahead.
But understand, this secret agreement we've still not seen. Congress has still not seen it. It's not even clear the administration has seen it. It's between this UN agency and Iran. And now we know that as part of it, Iran will find its own soil samples, which is like saying, I'll provide you my own urine sample for drug testing, and our inspectors and our equipment will tell you if there's any problems. Otherwise, don't worry about it. We've got this covered.
The president, and I quote, promised unprecedented verification. Well, I'll give him that. Certainly, this has got to be unprecedented. No one ever has offered verification to be done by the people being verified. I got to give the president exactly what he said. This is unprecedented verification.
No lie there. But it's not robust verification. It's not robust inspections, and it's not robust enforcement. I think that we know. And we've had a number of people make it very clear why that's the case. I don't know if you happen to see this, Jim, but General Barry McCaffrey was asked to endorse this deal as part of a letter from retired senior military officers. And he emailed back his answer, and he let whoever he emailed it to share what he emailed, and he made it very quick. He said, this agreement, he said, he opposes it. It's opposed by our allies, Israel and the Gulf states. It's greeted with joy and relief by the Iranians. There's no linkage to the increased threat from billions of dollars flowing into Iran and reinforcing their conventional muscle. He said it's got inadequate inspection, zero possibility to snap back sanctions. It legitimizes Iran as a nuclear power in no less than 15 years. He says we're in a bad place. Better not to have an agreement. The Iranians will have a nuclear reactor with or without this agreement, he says, but this option is not good. The alternative, he said, is not war. The option should be to wall off Iran for another decade and threaten retaliation if they attack any of their neighbors.
And be serious about it. But, of course, no one would take this administration seriously on a line drawn in the sand. The red line for this administration means go, not stop. But
that's an important point, because there were red lines that Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, drew, and all of them were respected. There were red lines that President Obama drew, and all of them have been transgressed as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and you're right. There are options, certainly, besides war, although anybody who thinks that if this regime gets nuclear weapons, whenever they get them, that we're not going to have to fight this regime sooner or later is a fool. We are. I mean, there's just no way around it. We had a chance, of course, to really defuse the situation when we could have supported the Green Revolution a couple of 3 years ago, and we could have gotten rid of this regime. And, of course, our regime did nothing whatsoever, and just allowed the mullahs to stay in power. But that would have been the only real answer. But you're going to fight these people sooner or later. I mean, they are barbaric throwbacks to the Dark Ages who believe in an apocalyptic view that Armageddon is a form of national policy. And I would much rather fight a non-nuclear Iran than a nuclear Iran, quite frankly.
That's a very good point. If you happen to believe that conflict is inevitable, then you definitely want to fight your enemy when he's weak, not when he's been strengthened by giving your enemy additional conventional arms, which this agreement foresees within a few years, a path to nuclear arms, and by enriching its economy with it, which also will happen very clearly here. And it used to be that we kind of understood this, and our politicians and our leaders understood this. The phrase that used to be used, and I have this in a column today in the Washington Times, people can find it, it was peace through strength. Now, that sounds good, but people have to think about what it means. And what it means is a paradox. The best way to avoid war is to prepare for war and to convince your enemies that you're not afraid to go kinetic, because a credible threat is an effective threat, and an implausible threat is a bluff, and bluffs are likely to be challenged. That's true, and bluffs get called in bars and poker games and also in international conflicts. And we are in the process right now of weakening our military, and there's some bipartisan responsibility for that. Sequestration is doing that. If you saw the op-ed by General Ray Odierno last week, he said we are not prepared. Right now, the U.S. Army is not prepared for the challenges it faces. We have shrunk the Army too much, down from at least 490,000 troops to 450,000. That's too much for the challenges of today, never mind the challenges of tomorrow. That is not a smart strategy.
Well, I admire the effort at sequestration because it was premised on the notion that nobody would allow federal expenditures to reach the point that would actually be triggered. Little did we realize the extent to which some members of Congress are willing to go to use your tax dollars to bribe their constituents. The concept struck me as good, but apparently there is not a pill poison enough to keep some members of Congress from nonetheless continuing with meat axe chops to things that are essential while we ignore things that are not. We'll come back and talk some more with Clifford May, again, founder and president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Their website, defenddemocracy.org. He is a veteran news reporter, foreign correspondent, and editor, has covered stories in more than 24 countries, and writes the weekly Foreign Desk column for the Washington Times. And from 97 to 01, he was director of communications for the Republican National Committee. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. The Iran deal. How could this ever be ratified as a treaty? Well, I'm glad you asked. We'll talk about that when we come back in just a moment. Good to have you with us on the Jim Bohannon Show as we talk tonight with Clifford May. Again, he is the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. He's online at defenddemocracy.org. And we're looking at the nuclear deal with Iran and, of course, the latest revelation that the Associated Press has discovered that, in fact, the United Nations is going to let Iran inspect its own nuclear facilities. As I said in the beginning, it sounds like a Saturday Night Live skit, but it's actually true. And I just cannot wait for the White House to spin that one in the context of their robust, unprecedented verification. Now then, if you were to bring the Founding Fathers forward 2.25 centuries and describe the outlines of this deal, we could overlook the part about what a nuke is, but just the outlines of the deal and its importance, and say, by the terms of the treaty ratification process outlined in the U.S. Constitution, is that or is that not a treaty?
Well, it's a very good question. And it's
everybody knows what the answer would be. Everybody knows it's a treaty.
Here's what I would say. It should be a treaty. Here's why. It's extraordinarily consequential. It's a nuclear arms limitation agreement that should rise to the level of a treaty. It also is with a nation with whom we do not have diplomatic relations, a nation we consider to be the leading terrorist sponsor in the world. For all those reasons, it should be framed as a treaty. It hasn't been. Now, I will say, some people have said to me, so why isn't Congress going to the Supreme Court and suing on that basis? And I've looked into this, and I've talked to international lawyers, and they say, look, it would be a hard case to make. One, the Constitution is not terribly clear about what rises to a treaty within the framework of the Constitution. Second, Congress too often in the past has allowed the waters to become murky by accepting agreements that should have been treaties, but in some cases Congress didn't really want to take a vote on it, because if you take a vote, you got to defend that to your constituents in the next election. So the precedents are not so good. Third, the courts tend to defer to the executive branch over to the legislative branch in these matters. And if there were a lawsuit and Congress were to lose, and by the way, expect only Republicans to participate in such a lawsuit, then Obama would say, you see, I was right all along, this need not be a treaty. So there are complications here, but you are right to say that something this consequential, the Founding Fathers would have wanted the American people through their representatives to approve it. Obama successfully turned it on its head and is saying to Congress, look, the most I'll allow you is if you can get a two-thirds majority in both houses to disapprove it. Maybe I'll listen to you then. And
why doesn't he just rule by edict? Why the pretense? I mean, he's already, in so many other ways and so many other issues, has already violated the Constitution, amending the Obamacare law, for example, which is not a presidential power, and right down through the whole list of amnesty and a host of other things. Why did he just ignore the pretense, simply say, because I said so? Now, you be good and just shut up. I mean, seriously, we're at a point in this country right now where I'd be willing to risk that lawsuit just by virtue of the fact that the intent of the Founding Fathers is abundantly clear, regardless of any precedent that weak-kneed previous Congresses may have made here. I'm sorry.
Yes, the intent of the Founding Fathers is absolutely clear, and here's what else would disturb them. Before going to Congress to even pass a judgment of approval or disapproval, which the President didn't want, he went to the UN Security Council and asked for a vote on this, and the UN Security Council endorsed this agreement. That means Russia got a vote, China got a vote, they're permanent members, Venezuela, a non-permanent member of the Security Council and an enemy self-declared of America, Venezuela got a vote, but Congress didn't yet have a chance to weigh in. By the way, I'm convinced, some people will disagree with me, that no matter how Congress votes on this, and I think for sure there will be a majority voting to disapprove. I don't think it's for sure and I'm doubtful that'll be a veto-proof majority. But that President Obama will say, thanks for your opinion, I'm going ahead with it anyway. I have the authority to do so, and he will find the authority to go ahead with it.
Well, only if he usurps powers that are not his. But again, we keep sitting back and letting him do this and sitting back and letting him do this, and it totally escapes me. I think that you could draw up close to half a dozen articles of impeachment against this man right now. And politically, practically, I know that's not a good option, but legally, It's there. It is absolutely there. And I love the testimony of Secretary of State John Kerry before the House Foreign Affairs Committee about this very subject. And he was asked by one of the members, a Republican from Wisconsin, as I recall, why this was not a treaty. His answer was classic. He said, well, passage of a treaty these days is virtually impossible. And I will translate that for anybody who hasn't thought that through. Well, if we play by the rules, we'll lose. And so we had to break the rules to get our way. I was just astounded. Again, it's on a level with the Iranians get to conduct their own nuclear inspections. I mean, that is what the Secretary of State of the United States said. If we actually followed the Constitution, we'd lose. He said that. And used that. Not only did he say it, but he used it as a rationale, like we should all nod our heads and say, oh, well, if you couldn't get your way any other way, then you should certainly break the rules.
The president said that he's not going to wait for Congress, that he has a pen and that he has a phone, and he's going to get done what he wants to get done.
You know, it would almost be worth it to have an incumbent.
That's not quite the way the Founding Fathers intended it. He intended power to be shared by three branches of government.
It would almost be worth it to have an incumbent Democrat President Joe Biden who could run for re-election. I mean, this guy, Barack Obama, has done more harm to the separation of powers than all of the previous presidents combined, all of them. And that, in many regards, is more important than the Iranian nuclear deal.
I am very much in favor of members of Congress of both parties, and we know the Republicans are going to pretty much all vote to disapprove. I'm hopeful that more Democrats will have the courage to disapprove. I think most of them are smart enough to see that from a policy standpoint, they should disapprove. This is a bad deal. From a political perspective, it's going to take a lot of courage to do that, because and we can talk about why, but they'll be targeted if they do so. But there are three good reasons to do so. Even if President Obama goes through with this deal, despite that vote of disapproval, one is simply to be honest. If you know it's a bad deal, you don't go.
All right, well, we're coming up on a break here. Before you get a full head of steam going here on three rules that we cannot reach before the break, we'll simply pause and we will come back and talk about the three things that Clifford May says would be quite sufficient rationale for going ahead and voting rejection. And at some point, I would like to know, is there anything this president can do that would actually receive a full challenge that the Supreme Court might uphold? Is there anything that he can't do? I'm not sure. Back in a moment. Good to have you with us on the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. And we're talking with Clifford May. Again, he is the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, online at defenddemocracy.org. All right, let's see. We've had the two prominent Democratic defections, and they are prominent Democrats, of course. Bob Menendez of New Jersey is the ranking Senate Foreign Relations Committee Democrat, and presumably, therefore, with some clout in his caucus regarding foreign affairs issues. Chuck Schumer of New York will almost certainly be the next Senate leader of the Democratic Party, replacing the retiring Harry Reid. So, you would think that those two people, if you could pick two Democrats and said, well, they're defecting, that those would be the two I would pick in hopes that they would have the clout to possibly bring others with them. So I guess the question for you, Cliff, would be this. Do they bring other Democrats with them, or does this rebound against them? For example, does this undercut Schumer's support to be the next Senate Democratic leader within the Democratic caucus?
Well, certainly Schumer is risking that by taking this position. As to whether he can bring people with him, he needs to try. He did write about a 1,600-word explanation of why he couldn't support this agreement, and I have to say it's available online. People should read it. His colleagues should read it. It is very thoughtful. It shows he did his homework. It's very incisive. It makes very clear why this is a very bad agreement that he cannot bring himself to approve. And Senator Menendez spoke at a New Jersey university this week And his speech was also extraordinarily powerful. Again, it is available online. And he also, from a policy perspective, from the point of view of American national security, he's made it very clear why he could not support an agreement like this, one that gives tens of billions of dollars and two pathways to nuclear weapons, to a regime that is a leading sponsor of terrorism and whose supreme leader continues to this day to shout death to America and death to Israel. And we know that's their intention. Now they're looking for a means to fulfill that intention, the capability to make that happen. And by the way, people say, well, that's okay, that's a supreme leader, but President Rouhani, isn't he a moderate? My answer is no, he's not. He has said very clearly in the past, saying death to America is easy. We need to find ways to act on that phrase.
And number two, even if he were a moderate, heck, if he were a flaming Western progressive, I mean, the president of Iran doesn't mean anything. It's the mullahs who call the shots.
No, it's the supreme leader who calls the shots in a theocratic regime like this, and also the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which serves the supreme leader and sometimes it's an incredibly powerful organization which owns businesses, has access to billions of dollars, all of that. That's where the real power is. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not really a republic. It's not a democracy. I don't doubt for a minute that people, the average person in the street, would like good relations with America and is kind of tired of Islamist rule. I have some familiarity with Iran. I was there in 1979 as a reporter. I covered the revolution itself. The Iranian people are good people, but the idea that because they want good relations with the U.S. means their supreme leader will do as they want, that means you don't understand the country at all.
Not like the mullah has to run in the Tehran primary.
No, he doesn't.
Not exactly, no. 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We, of course, had other senators declaring their stand this past day. A couple of Democrats, Angus King of Maine, who's a presumptive Democrat, declare their support for the treaty. I would think that the revelation from the Associated Press that Iran will get to do its own inspections, which ought to be very quick, I would think. Yep, we're in compliance. I mean, the idea, surely, if there are any reasonable people out there who are not pure Barack Obama clones, this would be enough to say, even if you are a diehard, dedicated Democrat, Mr. President, I love you to pieces, but I can't go down this path. Surely there have got to be a few more of those.
Well, you would hope so, and that means that they are judging this from a policy perspective, not from a political perspective, not simply saying, the president wants me to do this, or buying the president's argument, and he's been making this argument strongly, that there's no alternative to this agreement other than war. Now, that's an odd thing for him to say, because it wasn't that long ago when he was saying, I would prefer to have no agreement than a bad agreement. Well, what did he mean when he said that? Not that he'd prefer war, obviously. So what are the possibilities if you don't have an agreement? Well, we could go back to...
Let's go back to those three the reasons you said to vote against this deal, even if the president goes ahead. I think it's worth looking at.
Well, there's several things. One is the president could say, wow, Congress really disapproves. Here's what I'm going to have to do. Not easy, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell the Iranians, you know what, I come from a democratic society. A majority of members of Congress representing a majority of the American people think this deal isn't good enough. I need at least some clarifications. For example, that we can inspect any sites. You're obviously saying that we can't. I think we may need some addenda, maybe some amendments to these agreements, some clarifications, so the American people feel more comfortable. You go back to our European allies. I mean Germany, and I mean France, and I mean the UK. I really don't mean Russia and China, because they're not our allies.
No,
and so we have to talk through what we do when there are violations, how we're going to respond, because right now the idea put forward that we can snap back sanctions is a fiction. I can explain to you, but we can't. We can't snap back sanctions, and if we do, under this agreement, we relieve the Iranians of their responsibilities and obligations to curtail the nuclear weapons program they still don't admit they ever had.
Mm-hmm. All right. Voting against this, if the president's going to go ahead anyway, why should any member of Congress vote against the deal?
One, because it's an exercise in truth-telling. This is their legacy, too. They shouldn't approve something they know to be a bad deal just because they were asked to or because they're afraid of the other consequences. And they don't need to be, because the deal may go through anyhow, as we discussed. Secondly, They will give more leverage to the next administration to unravel the deal. More leverage, more latitude. The next president will say, the American people didn't approve this. I need to begin to repair the damage. There are various ways to do that. And thirdly, by sending the message that they don't approve, they will at least slow the gold rush into Tehran. Various businesses will say, you know what, I'm willing to invest $10 million but not $100 million, because if the sanctions get put back on at some point by the next American president, I'm going to be in trouble. So you will slow the economic boost you give to Iran if the Congress disapproves this deal.
The economic boost, that in and of itself is amazing. Lenin was right, although it didn't turn out that he was right in the way he had hoped for. But when it comes time to hang all the capitalists, they shall be found bidding on the rope. Close, Vladimir, very close. More with Clifford May in just a moment. Welcome back to Jim Bohannon Show. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. And the Iranian nuclear deal, well, I guess the summation of what we're saying tonight, Clifford May, is that it's looking pretty good. The 54 Republicans need 13 Democrats to cross over the aisle. And so far they have 2, Menendez and Schumer, 2 big ones, but only 2. And finding 11 more, that's going to be tough, is it not?
It's going to be tough, as you pointed out earlier in this program. The fact that we've now had a disclosure that the Iranians are actually going to be allowed under a secret agreement not disclosed to Congress to do their own self-inspection, which means that no international inspector will ever get into an Iranian military site. That's what it implies. That's what the Iranians have been saying. The Americans have said that's not true. Now we know the Iranians were telling us the truth. That may sway some votes. That may cause some members of Congress to say, I just can't vote to approve. But it's hard. You have left-wing groups like MoVan.org saying, if you do not vote for this agreement and to approve it, we're going to come after you, we're going to primary you, we're going to hit on your donors, we're going to target you. And you have the President of the United States who has made clear that he expects loyalty and he would take a vote of disapproval as a personal repudiation of his leadership.
So what's the downside? Well, anyway, looking at this deal, the best that this deal could grant, the best, and that assumes that an awful lot of things that we know to be untrue, in fact, are true, and that Iran is scrupulous in following the terms of the deal. The best that you can hope for is a 15-year postponement of the nuclear program. That's the best. When the president uses the term prevent, he's lying. He knows better. And a lie is when you say something that you know to be false. He knows better. He is lying. This prevents nothing. At best, it postpones.
Right, and that's also what Senator Menendez was emphasizing in his speech the other day. This deal does not do what we set out to do in these negotiations, which is to dismantle the nuclear weapons program that Iran has, never admits to having had, still doesn't admit to having had. All it does is delay the program, and that's why I said earlier it gives Iran 2 pathways to nuclear weapons. What's being called the patient pathway means Iran complies, gets all the goodies it can, which includes such things as conventional weapons, the ability to develop, which it is anyway, intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's important because you don't need intercontinental ballistic missiles to hit, for example, Saudi Arabia and Israel. You only need them to deliver warheads, nuclear warheads, I should say, to other continents. You and I live on another continent.
You could always, of course, get very short-range missiles, put them on 3 freighters, put one off the Gulf Coast, one off the East Coast, one off the West Coast, 3 explosions, an electromagnetic pulse attack. You could drive us back into the 19th century. That
could be done, too. Jim Woolsey has a piece on that in the Washington Times today as well. You're absolutely right. So, yes, what you're doing is delaying it, and you're saying at the end of 10 or 15 years or so, you will be welcomed as a member in good standing of the nuclear club. This is called the sunset provision. It is a very curious thing. It's one thing to say, look, if you change your behavior, if you're not a supporter of terrorism, if you're not yelling death to America, death to Israel, and threatening Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries as well, then we're going to take these restrictions off. But to simply say, you don't have to do anything, it's just a matter of time, that means what you're doing is hoping that the supreme leader, whoever he is at that point, and other rulers of Iran will mellow into moderates over 10 years. Well, they haven't over the past 36 years. That means you don't have a strategy. You have your fingers crossed. That's not what a great power should be doing.
No, and, well, I guess we are still technically a great power, although we seem to be doing everything in our power to avoid being a great power. You made earlier references to our military preparedness, and now would be a good time to perhaps return to that briefly. We certainly are nowhere near as prepared as we once were. Are we?
Oh, no, we're nowhere near as prepared as we once were. And one way to say this, if 9/11 was, to some people, thought of as a sort of the Pearl Harbor for our generation, let's recognize that right now the American military is smaller than it was before the Pearl Harbor of 9/11, with more shrinkage on the governmental to-do list. So, in other words, the president has been saying for some time the tide of war is receding, even though al-Qaeda is not just alive and well, but is expanding its territory. The Islamic State, which split off and is now a rival to al-Qaeda, of course, has as much territory as the UK inside of what used to be Syria and Iraq, and it has expanded into Africa. You have Iran now controlling 4 Arab capitals and supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthi rebels, and the Assad regime, which continues to use chemical weapons despite the great diplomatic success we theoretically had with him. All this is going on. You have to ask yourself, is this a time to begin to unilaterally disarm? And that is what our policy is right now, to begin to unilaterally disarm because the tide of war is receding. Take it on faith.
Frightening. Truly frightening. Back in just a moment. Clifford May is our guest. He is the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Their website, defenddemocracy.org. We're talking about the Iran nuclear deal. When does this all come to a head now? Is there any handle on just when this is going to be settled one way or the other?
Yes, there is a deadline. It's next month. It's in September. If I remember correctly, I'm not sure I do. It's towards the middle of the month. I think the deadline is the 17th for a Hill vote on the Iran deal. And I don't remember when the Senate vote is. Probably not long after, though. I'm not sure it's been scheduled.
So very close to the next Republican debate, as a matter of fact.
I guess that's so. I forget.
When's
the next debate?
That's September the 15th at the
September the 15th.
CNN debate at the Reagan.
Down on my calendar as deadline for the Hill vote. Now, I guess it could come earlier than that if they wanted to schedule it that way, but I don't know that it's all in stone yet. Mm-hmm. But September is the month for a decision on this, we believe.
Yeah. I must confess, I'm not even sure what arguments you use. If what is on the table is not sufficient to sway everybody who cares about this country, I don't know what is. I mean, there just simply is no possible basis when the president's own rationale has been blown out of the water by this latest revelation. Unprecedented, robust verification.
There's one other argument we should make sure that we discuss very quickly, and that is nuclear proliferation. Because the Saudis, among others, but the Saudis very clearly have said, anything Iran gets, we get.
Yeah.
So if you have the Iranians getting nuclear weapons, and again, the patient pathway means they don't cheat. The impatient pathway means they do cheat, and they will get away with it because you cannot snap back sanctions. It's just not going to happen for reasons I can't explain. If they're not obvious, and they probably are. So the impatient pathway is they go ahead and either in this administration or the next administration, they cheat incrementally, and they get to a nuclear weapon sooner than in the next 10 years.
Sure. And then what are we going to do? Well, I'll tell you exactly. We'll say, oh, well, gosh, hope you're nice with that nuclear weapon. Of course, what we should have done with North Korea, the minute that you have a test that is a successful nuclear test, every nuclear facility in that country should be blasted to smithereens, because they are not, at that point, a nuclear power. Oh, they will be soon, but they're not yet.
Well, remember that Iran and that Bill Clinton in 1984, there was a similar agreement, and he said with the same kind of assurance,
yes,
this will mean that North Korea will not have nuclear weapons. North Korea does have nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. They have missiles. They're developing longer-range missiles, missiles that may be able soon to reach such targets as Los Angeles with some accuracy, all because it was a bad agreement. Now, the South Koreans don't have. If I were the South Koreans, I'd want them. If I were the Japanese at this point, I'd want them. The Saudis, we said, want them. Mm-hmm. The Turks may want them. The Egyptians. Once you have that many nuclear weapons sloshing around in the world, how easy is it for terrorists to get their hands on one? And as you say, use it from a boat, a tanker, launch from a scud close by. Who knows who will use it, and who knows what the target will be? Not necessarily Israel, not necessarily the U.S., we don't know, but the possibility of nuclear weapons being used in the next 20, 30, 40 years becomes very high.
Very, very high, absolutely. And again, there are so many ways by which a nuclear-armed Iran could have, well, at least in their minds, plausible deniability. A nuclear weapon went off over there. Not ours. It's not ours.
Absolutely. Look, this regime has been responsible, not just according to me, but according to such people as General Odierno, who we mentioned, the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Martin Dempsey, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans. Often they will use their proxies, such as Hezbollah, to kill those Americans. That's what they did, for example, in Beirut, when they killed more Marines than had been killed at any other encounter since Iwo Jima. That's what they did at Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia in the 1990s. They often use proxies to carry out their acts of war and terrorism. That's their pattern in the past. Probably will be their pattern in the future.
You have to wonder, does anybody remember the name Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister who, of course, left Munich, Germany, and came back to Britain with the peace in our time wave of his hand? I thought that lesson was indelibly learned at that point after we lost, 75, 80 million people in World War II. Apparently it's a lesson that has to be learned over and over and over and over.
Appeasement is a very tempting policy. Churchill said two things we should remember. One is that an appeaser is somebody who feeds the crocodile hoping it will eat him last. And the other thing is what he said to Neville Chamberlain. You had a choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor. We will have war.
Well, that's where we sit. In the meantime, I suppose there is still time for people to actually make their feelings known. There are a lot of ways you can contact your member of Congress, certainly way beyond snail mail and phone calls, email, Twitter, you name it. The whole panoply is in front of us. And I guess
that would be a good idea. Congressmen should hear from their constituents.
Yeah. And they do pay attention. A lot of people think, well, my voice doesn't matter. Actually, members of Congress, there are some up there who would, depending on what the polls say or the email says, they would decide whether or not the sun rises in the east. As a matter of fact, individually, maybe not. Collectively, you have a lot of clout. All right, Clifford May, our guest. And again, he is president at defenddemocracy.org, which, by the way, is a great website. You should really check out what is available there as we look ahead to the deal on Iranian nukes. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.